Hey, everybody, welcome to Locked On Lakers on YouTube. Brian Kamenetsky and Andy Kamenetsky, joined by Jake Fischer, author of Built to Lose, How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League Forever. Check out the full podcast on Friday for a longer interview with Jake. But there's a lot of stuff, fascinating little details in this book, tons of great original reporting, particularly about one of our favorite players, Andy, Andrew Bynum.
Yeah. We cannot get enough Andrew Bynum information, Andrew Bynum nuggets. We found the process of covering Drew for the entirety of his Laker career just absolutely fascinating. And there's a lot in this book about his time in Philadelphia, because he was part of the big Dwight Howard deal that led him back to the Lakers the first time around. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting in this, because Sam Hinkie, who then was with Philadelphia, is obviously a big figure in this book, was that he actually was against the trade, or at the very least thought that Philadelphia was overvaluing Bynum in the process. What were the reasons for that?
I think it just comes down to when he was interviewing. This happened in the fall of 2012 after that deal happened. I believe that was August 2012 when the trade happened. He was interviewing for that job a year before it really came open again. And I think he was trying to show what his data analysis could compute. I think it was truly just a numerical. This is what the Lakers were X amount points per possessions worse with Bynum on the court versus off. I think he really was just bringing an analytical report that suggested that Bynum, for all his numbers, his teams were actually better when he was off the floor.
This was even before you get into the health question.
Well, he also was Bynum coming off an All-Star season. That was the 1 year that he made the All-Star team.
He started the All-Star.
His last season with the Lakers.
Yeah, I think, and again, Hinkie was trying to get that job. So I think he was really trying to bring it all he got. And he also, he wrote it in his resignation letter that, I found out, I don't think he wanted to become public, but also from knowing him, he's a guy who likes to zig when people zag. And I think bringing a lot of evidence to an ownership group and saying the guy he just traded for, he ain't the guy. I think he probably wanted to, put his balls on the table, if I'm allowed to say that on the podcast, and be like, look, this is what I can do for you guys if you hire me.
You should probably ask before you say it, not after. But yes, you can say it.
You can even say put your nuts on the table. It's fine.
Yeah.
There you go.
One of the things that I think is just fascinating about it, because Andy and I at the time, I remember saying it, I was pro trading Bynum, even if the idea that Dwight might walk, because there was no earthly way, as the general manager of the Lakers, I wanted to have to sign him to an extension. And if you don't trade him, you almost certainly have to sign him. So I think the Lakers win that deal just by making that somebody else's choice. Both with Bynum specifically, but also kind of the league more generally. How common is that predicament where you have a guy that you are probably going to, either need to trade him or keep him? Keeping him is probably a bad idea, but maybe letting him go is an even worse idea. How often does this sort of problem pop up, and how good are GMs at actually dealing with it?
The best ones are better, obviously, but it pops up all the time. I think that's why Lonzo Ball's names was coming up a lot in trade talks with the Pelicans this year. I think the Pelicans, at the beginning of that time period, they didn't want to pay him. I think that might have shifted now, but that's also happening with Dennis Schroeder right now. I mean, the Lakers are kind of put themselves in a position where they got to give him the money he wants, and they were trying to get off of him at the deadline. I do believe that, trying to move him in those Kyle Lowry talks because they don't want to pay him what he thinks he's worth, and now they're in a situation where they probably have to.
Another thing that I thought was really interesting from the book, it talks about how Bynum, like Kobe a couple years before him, went to Germany for the PRP treatment in his knee. And it turned out they suspected that it made it worse, unlike what happened with Kobe.
Yes. I remember, I don't know if I put this detail in the book, but when the Sixers were bringing their, bring his medical records to their medical staff, they showed it to 3 different doctors, and 4 different doctors, and 3 out of the 4 said his knees looked fine. And then when they brought his knees back after the Germany details, all 4 said his knees do not look fine. So It was
crazy.
definitely an unmitigated disaster. I really do think so.
Didn't one guy describe the knee as slush, or like
Yes.
what was showing up on the MRI?
And that was the theme that ended up, like, he had no cartilage left in the knee. Like, it was just a bunch of bone and ligament just grinding up on each other, which, that works great at a 7th grade dance, but not in a professional athlete's knee.
He is one of those guys that I think is one of the great what ifs and shames, because as much as there were questions about how much he truly loved the game or whatever it might be, the talent, the hands that he had around the basket and the skill level was undeniable. And you put him in with Greg Oden and Brandon Roy and some of these guys that you just like never, you could just see it was doomed from the Lakers knew when they drafted him he might be a problem physically. But just guys like that, he made plenty of money, he should be fine, he has children's children and all that stuff. But professionally, it is a shame because, man, people forget he was incredibly talented.
He was, and we saw that. I mean, I have all these details in the book. Maybe I'm jumping the line of your questions here, but throughout that year, as he was progressing and progressing and progressing, and then hitting a setback and a setback and a setback, but every time he was able to get on the floor, any Sixers player, any staffer you talked about this guy like a combo of Yao Ming and Shaq, where like he was just the hardest guy to guard. He would take triple teams and quadruple teams. He could hit threes. He had a handle. He had a post game. He could do it all, and it just never materialized ever again.
Oh, and Andy, man, Andrew Bynum in the 3-point era for centers. Remember when it was Mike Brown who had to bench him for taking threes because Andrew was, quote, expanding my game. That was his explanation for why he was taking unapproved threes.
Now he'd be celebrated for shooting them,
Absolutely.
Yeah. He was seeing the NBA where it was going, and he was also acting out. Like, both things can be true at once. He was giving Mike Brown a very deliberate middle finger, and he was trying to space the floor. There's that part in there that I thought was pretty eye-opening in terms of what Bynum was dealing with. That section where Thad Young asks him, how much money are you making right now? And Bynum says $17 million. And he says, look, for that type of money, you should not be doing anything physical at all. He's like, you should not be up washing your dishes. You shouldn't do your own laundry. You shouldn't take out the trash. Like, you should hire somebody to do that. And like, this was not far removed from Bynum having a setback because he went out bowling. And it got me thinking about in 2009, when Bynum was in a rehab period, there was this big controversy because he was seen at the Playboy Mansion.
I remember this.
And he had a bunny on his shoulders. And this was at a time he still couldn't play. And people were freaking out about this. And sports talk radio, echo chamber. And at the time, I was like, man, everybody needs to calm down. Like, I guarantee Bynum in his rehab work doing squats is lifting heavier weights than this like 110-pound Playboy playmate. In retrospect, I think I was wrong. Like, I think actually it turns out all that stuff added up. He really did he needed to be not hanging out in the grotto. Like, he really should not have even walked inside the mansion or like to the party. Just the act of walking around like with a cocktail was probably putting him behind the 8 ball.
Yeah, you flash forward to his time in Philly while he's having those great practices. Then they'd hear, oh no, he can't play for another 2 weeks. Every day they'd show up to the arena thinking Bynum's going to show up today, and then to hear some new injury. And the Thad Young story you're talking about, word got around that he hurt his knees walking his dogs on a gravel road by his house. And that's why Thad marched up to him, because Thad, at the end of the day, players want to win so they can get paid on their next deal. You get paid more when you're on a winning team. And they thought this guy was the missing piece to help them actually make a run in the East. And he was like, big man, can you just pay somebody to walk your dog so you don't get hurt and we can actually have you and like be a good team? I understand where Thad was coming from.
Well, you missed out that you couldn't get him for the book because, my God, that guy was a quote.
He is an interesting dude. The book is Built to Lose, I'm sure. Can't blame you. The book is Built to Lose, How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League Forever. Bleacher Report reporter Jake Fischer. Thanks so much for coming on. And again, check out Friday's episode of Locked On Lakers for our full conversation with Jake Fischer. Lots of stuff about tanking and lots about the Lakers and what we call the dark years. Thanks, Jake.
Thank you, guys.